In the heart of the mighty Safavid Empire, a war was raging. But this one wasn't fought with swords and shields, it was fought with ideas. It was a full-blown intellectual war, pitting absolute faith against human reason, and its aftershocks would shape an entire culture for centuries.
At the center of this whole conflict was one pretty explosive question. Is thinking a crime? You see, for a new, powerful group of scholars in 16th century Iran, the answer was a hard yes. For them, philosophy wasn't just a mistake. It was a spiritual poison, a heresy that could tear down the very foundations of their faith. Okay, let's get into this.
So here's what we're going to break down. We'll start with the challenge to reason itself. Then we'll unpack the Akhbārī doctrine that really fanned the flames. We'll look at the all-out war on philosophy, find out how it managed to survive, and then we'll talk about why this fight from so long ago still really matters to us today.
All right, so let's set the scene. We're in Safavid Iran, this incredible empire at the peak of its cultural power. This was a place where intellectual debate was literally the lifeblood of the educated class, shaping everything from law to society. But something was starting to shift. A powerful new current was forming under the surface.
And this is really the heart of it. A new school of thought didn't just disagree with philosophers. No, they completely reframed the whole game. They started calling philosophy heresy. They argued that using your own independent reason was a one-way ticket to irreligion. The battle lines had officially been drawn.
So who exactly were the people leading this charge against centuries of intellectual tradition? Well, they were known as the Akhbārīs, and their core belief was as simple as it was extreme.
Basically, the Akhbārī school was a movement that said, let's throw out the entire intellectual toolkit. For hundreds of years, scholars had relied on reason, logic, and expert agreement to understand religious texts. The Akhbārī said no to all of it. They argued that these were flawed human inventions that could only twist and corrupt the perfect Word of God.
And to really get how big of a deal this was, just look at how they stacked up against their rivals, the Ash'arīs. The Ash'arīs believed a trained mind should interpret texts using logic, but for the Akhbārīs, any thinking that wasn't a direct quote from a narration was a dangerous, forbidden act. This wasn't a small difference of opinion. It was a fundamental clash over the role of the human mind itself.
So here's the kicker. If you get rid of reason, what do you have left? The Akhbārī answer was absolute. Truth could only be found in the literal words of a specific set of texts known as the Four Books. That's it. Full stop. Any knowledge from outside that tiny circle wasn't just wrong, it was completely illegitimate.
So, armed with this unbending, literalist doctrine, the Akhbārīs didn't just debate philosophers, they declared total war. This was a systematic mission to scrub the entire culture clean of what they saw as a dangerous intellectual disease.
And their strategy was ruthlessly effective. They hit from two sides at once. The first attack was personal. They went after the philosophers themselves, trying to destroy their reputations and push them out of society. The second was ideological. They went after the ideas of philosophy, painting them as poison to true faith.
And the personal attacks were vicious. Philosophers were publicly trashed as heretics. They were accused of kufr, blasphemy, which, by the way, was a charge that could get you killed. As the Akhbārīs gained more power, they got philosophy banned from the religious schools, the madrasas, and even used the government to hunt down and exile thinkers who wouldn't toe the line.
And this shows you the real human cost. Take Mullā Sadrā, one of the greatest minds of his time. He was trying to bring philosophy, mysticism, and religion together into one beautiful system. For that, Akhbārī clerics branded him a heretic and had him thrown out of the capital, Isfahan. He spent years in a painful exile. This wasn't just an abstract debate, it was ruining people's lives.
On the ideological front, they targeted very specific ideas. The philosophical idea that the universe could be eternal? Heresy. It contradicted divine creation. The argument that God knows things through universal principles, not every little detail of our lives, that was a challenge to God's power. Even core ideas like bodily resurrection and the immortal soul were attacked as philosophical distortions of the pure, simple truth.
This quote from an Akhbārī poet just perfectly captures their entire mindset. See how he calls it the philosophy of the Greeks? That wasn't an accident. They were branding it as a foreign, pagan infection. The argument was simple and powerful. Why would you ever need Aristotle or Plato when you have the pure, perfect words of the prophet, the Nabi? It was a call for purity against what they saw as corrupting outside ideas.
Okay, so you have this coordinated campaign of personal attacks, ideological warfare, and state-sponsored persecution. You'd think that philosophy in Iran was pretty much doomed, right? That it was on the brink of extinction. And yet, that's not what happened.
Despite everything thrown at it, philosophy held on. It survived. And a lot of that incredible resilience came from this amazing intellectual community known as the Isfahan School, which just kept producing brilliant thinkers right under the noses of their opponents. So the question is, how on earth did they do it?
Well, it really came down to three crucial things. First, philosophy wasn't some niche hobby. It was deeply baked into centuries of religious and scientific thought. Second, its tools were just too useful. You couldn't just get rid of Aristotelian logic because it was basically the operating system for other critical fields like law and theology. And third, and this is a big one, philosophy had friends in very high places. Powerful rulers like Shah Abbas actually respected and protected top philosophers like Mir Damad, seeing them as shining jewels of his court, not as threats.
So, a nearly 500-year-old debate in Iran? It's easy to look at this and think, okay, that's just a dusty chapter in a history book. But this story is so much more than that. It's actually a timeless blueprint for a kind of conflict that we see playing out all over the world, even today.
Because at its core, this whole intellectual war is about that eternal tug-of-war between literalism and interpretation. It's about the safety of absolute, unshakable rules versus the challenging freedom of critical thinking. This is a struggle that has popped up in almost every culture and every era of human history, and it's absolutely still being fought right now.
So, what are the big takeaways from all this? First, the playbook for crushing ideas pretty much never changes. You make it personal, you attack the thinker, and you label their ideas as dangerous. Second, when you build walls around knowledge and forbid certain questions, you're pretty much guaranteed to end up with intellectual stagnation. But the last lesson, and this is the hopeful one, is that ideas are tough. They're incredibly resilient, and they can survive even in the most hostile environments.
Which leaves us with one final, really vital question to think about. The story of the Akhbārīs and the philosophers of Isfahan is a